Hey everyone, this is Mike. Today I'm going to be continuing a conversation that I started in one of my previous videos where I talked about the healers in Endwalker, how they were going to be changing up the healer role a little bit and divide the healers in a pure healer and a barrier healer role within the healer role itself. And during that video I brought up the tanks, because going into Shadowbringers the tanks were also going to be divided in the main tank and the off tank role. And that's where I also talked about the fact that whilst we do have a main tank off tank division, like for example Warrior Dark Knight would be our main tanks and Paladin Gunbreaker would be our off tanks, but it's not necessarily that if you don't play those two jobs in their specific role that they can't function anymore. The only thing that I would really say is that Warrior should always be the main tank, Paladin should always be the off tank because that is where they gain the biggest advantage, but Gunbreaker and Dark Knight have no issue switching in between the two roles, because there's no real reason why they need to be a main tank or they need to be an off tank. For example, with Warrior, they only really gain advantages when they are in the main tank position through their healing. Vengeance is another example as to why you would want to be a main tank, whereas Paladin likes to be the off tank because Passage of Arms is much easier to aim towards your party if you're already standing behind the boss instead of in front of it, and then Spirits Within also doesn't lose its damage because you will always be at full HP in the off tank role. But when it comes down to Gunbreaker and Dark Knight, they really don't care if they're in front of the boss or behind it, taking damage or not. Of course, there are still some minor things that might want to make them be one role or the other. For example, Gunbreaker would be better in the off tank because it's a little bit annoying to move the boss around during your burst windows, but that's really the only caveat that you have when you are main tanking as a Gunbreaker. So overall, our tank role, you can literally just take whichever two tanks that you like to bring, whether it is for their mitigation or whether it is for their playstyle, of course for your personal preference as to what you want to play, and you'll still be fine clearing any content in the game. And when I brought that up, a few people of course immediately commented on it, on the fact that this balance is possible because of the homogenization of the tank role. If you don't know what that word means, basically all of the tanks are very similar in what they bring to the party. For example, each tank, when it comes down to their personal mitigation, has a 20% in Rampart, they have a 30%, they have a spammable mitigation, and then they also have a unique cooldown, Paladin being the only one that misses out on that one. But then again, it is made up for the fact that they have a second raid-wide utility, which is kind of like the unique thing about Paladin. So there are very similar things in what they bring in like their own personal mitigation, also in raid-wide mitigation, because each tank also has their 90-second raid-wide cooldown. So they're very similar in that aspect, which is also the main reason why you can literally bring anything, because they're also very similar. And for some people, this made it so that they weren't all too happy with the tank role because they just felt too same. There wasn't enough uniqueness in the tank role because every tank just kind of brought the same thing to the table. But I'm on the opinion that whilst there is a lot of homogenization going on, and whilst I do believe that this is the reason as to why our tanks are so well balanced at the moment, there is still enough uniqueness within the tanks themselves as well as to why you might want to bring one tank over the other when we're purely talking about a utility aspect, because of course each tank is going to feel different in how you play it because their DPS rotation is going to be very different. There's a slight argument to be made between Warrior and Dark Knight that they are very similar to play because of what they did to Dark Knight in Shadowbringers. They made it very similar to Warrior, but if you were to play Warrior and you would then switch on to Dark Knight, they still play very different in what you are going to be doing to maintain your buffs and whatnot. They just have a few abilities that are very similar to each other when it comes down to their DPS rotation. But when we look at it from a utility standpoint, whilst a lot of the utility that each tank brings is very similar to what other tanks have, they also all have their own unique aspect. Like for example, Warrior has their healing, Dark Knight has their shielding and TBN, so they prevent a lot of damage. Paladin has the extra raid-wide mitigation, and then Gunbreaker has their damage. I know it's kind of weird to talk about damage as utility, but if you look at the DPS role, the reason why Black Mage and Samurai are still very popular is because they just bring a lot of damage. They might not have raid buffs, but they make up for that in the fact that they just bring a little bit of extra damage compared to the other jobs. When we're talking about damage within the tank role as well, it's pretty much what you would expect it to be. It's only a few hundred DPS apart from each other, with Gunbreaker Paladin being the leaders in the DPS and Warrior Dark Knight doing a little bit less, but it is also because, in my opinion, Warrior and Dark Knight are much stronger tanks, again because Warrior makes it so that they can heal themselves a lot, so the healers don't have to pay as much attention to them, and Dark Knight again prevents a lot of damage in the first place and trivializes pretty much any tank buster in the game with TBN. So again, there's a lot of added safety that these two tanks bring, and any of the healer GCDs that normally would be spent healing these two jobs can now be spent on doing damage. So basically the damage that they prevent, or in Warrior's case the damage that they heal up, is kind of made up for the fact that the healers can now do some extra damage, which is like the few hundred DPS that Warrior and Dark Knight might be behind on compared to Gunbreaker and Paladin. So I do think that the balance within the role is really good. Even this DPS discrepancy that I'm talking about is literally only a few hundred DPS. I'll even put the little table on the screen so you can see it for yourself. So there's a really good balance within the role at the moment. Again, this is made possible because of the homogenization of all of the skills. Makes it so that because every tank kind of brings the same, they can make it so that their damage output is also very similar to each other, because of course if you have one tank that just is the best tank there is in terms of mitigating damage, then you will also need to lower their DPS output quite a bit, because otherwise that tank would just be in any team composition and you wouldn't be able to do that either. So because of homogenization, any tank is viable, any tank combination is viable as well, because Warrior and Paladin are the only ones that really want to be in their spot of main tank and off tank. Gunbreaker and Dark Knight can just flex in between the two, and then of course if you have Warrior Paladin in the group itself, they're already going to be in their main tank off tank position, so it kind of works out on their own. Now when it comes down to the uniqueness, of course I already talked about what each tank brings to the party, but there are also other reasons as to why you might want to take a specific tanking combination. And that has to do with different fights or how you want to handle different mechanics. And that is where you might just want to be bringing a tank not just because you like playing it, but because you want to do a specific strategy, or because they are just a little bit better for a specific part of the fight of how you want to handle certain things. And I'll bring a couple of examples for this current raid tier. So when we start with E9 Savage, we really like having a Paladin in our group, because they can make it so that they can use cover on the Tank Buster to make it so that the boss does not need to spin, because you can't keep the boss straight if you're tank swapping for that Tank Buster. But what you can do is you can cover with Paladin to make it so that the main tank does not get their magic vulnerability up, so they can just take the Tank Buster as if it was a normal Tank Buster, because the Paladin actually gets the magic vuln up because of cover. It's something that we've been doing for a very long time now, and I think it's actually a pretty cool way of using cover, because for the most part cover has been pretty useless this expansion, and this is kind of like a fun little way to utilize it. Going into E10 Savage, that is where we really liked having Paladin plus Warrior, because they both bring shields with their raid-wide mitigation, and there is one part in the fight that we like to cheese, and to cheese that specific mechanic we need to make it so that we take 0 damage. Shields are gonna be much stronger at allowing you to take 0 damage compared to having, for example, Dark Knight plus Gunbreaker, because they don't bring shields, they only have percentage-based mitigation, and shields are much stronger for that specific mechanic that we are trying to cheese. Moving over to E11, the way that we handle that fight, we pretty much need a Gunbreaker in the group, because otherwise it's not really going to be working out that well. If you were to bring Paladin, their invuln is on a too long of a cooldown, so it wouldn't really work, and Warrior and Dark Knight take damage during their invuln, so they can't do that either because they'll get damage down, whereas Gunbreaker, their invuln is on a short enough cooldown for it to work, and you take 0 damage during your invuln, meaning that you won't take the damage down from doing that specific cheese that we are doing. And then, for example, last but not least, on Oracle of Darkness, Warrior is really strong there because they are the only tank that can invuln both of the Black Halo double tank busters, where if you're playing any other tanking combination that does not have a Warrior, then you would need to share that final Black Halo, or you would need to do some wonky stuff during double APOC, where you would not be able to just invuln that one instead, which is what we like to do because it basically trivializes that one when it comes down to the tank movement. So as you can see, each tank still brings something unique to the table as to why you might want to take one over the other, whether it is because of a specific mechanic that you're trying to cheese, whether it is because of specific cooldowns or something like that, like for example Oracle of Darkness, Warrior being the only one that can invuln both. Maybe it might be because of what you just prefer as a tank yourself. Do you just want to be the healer of the team? Whenever I play Warrior, whilst I do care about my DPS output, the first thing that I'll look at when I look at the logs is how much healing was I able to put out, because that's something that I really enjoy when I play Warrior. Then of course, once I'm done with proc, once I have been that very safe proc tank in the Warrior, I enjoy playing Gunbreaker because now I don't need to pay as much attention to the mechanics anymore, so I don't need the easy playstyle of the Warrior. Now I can just switch over to that little bit more of a busy playstyle of Gunbreaker while not being as safe, but I also don't need to be as safe anymore because my healers are used to the fight, the rest of my team is used to the fight and I don't need to just be able to keep myself alive whilst the rest of my party is on fire, basically. So that is why I can go and play Gunbreaker and have some fun in that. So that is why I personally really enjoy the way that tanks are right now. Anything that you want to play is viable depending on if there is a specific tanking fantasy that you want to chase, like for example, not taking any damage at all on Dark Knight, really being the bastion in front of your tank in Paladin, being the healer of the group in Warrior, or just being the 5th DPS in that of Gunbreaker. Whatever you want to play is there for you. And then of course, if you're not playing a tank for the utility that they bring, maybe you would like to play it for the DPS rotation that it brings. Gunbreaker is my example of that. I really love their rotation. Yes, their cooldowns maybe leave a couple of things to be desired, but their gameplay is just so incredibly fun, and that is why Gunbreaker is my favorite tank to play. It's also the reason why I play Warrior whenever I do something that's a little bit more serious, like for example Ultimate or Raid Progression. That is where I'll play Warrior, because they are just the stronger tank itself. But I do feel like Gunbreaker is a lot more fun to play, which is why I'll switch over to that after we've had a few kills of the content, to just have a little bit more fun myself. Of course, all of these things are my own personal opinion. I really do like the homogenization of the tank role, because it makes it so that every tank is similar enough that you can bring them to whatever content and every combination will work. They do still have some unique quirks about them that do make them stand out within this tank role. Yes, maybe it's not enough uniqueness as some people might want, but I do think that there is still enough uniqueness as to why you might want to bring one tank over the other. Anyways, let me know in the comments down below what you think of this. Do you think that they homogenize the tanks too much? Would you like to see a little bit more uniqueness here or there? But you also have to remember that when they do make the tanks more unique, maybe that might impact the balancing of the tanks a little bit as well, as that might become a little bit more difficult. Anyways, let me know in the comments down below. Always quite happy to read through them. But on that note, I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank my Patreons for supporting me, and I'll see you in the next one.